Shall we begin with the James O'Keefe news? Because I'm actually kind of curious about this. It is our main story for today. So far we do not have the full copy, like the full hour of the mostly raw footage with the bit at the beginning that's like the preview part that James O'Keefe usually does. I checked on his Rumble, haven't checked his YouTube, but they usually upload at the same time. I checked on his Rumble, it's not there yet. So what we have here is a preview, but it's a 7-minute preview, and usually these include all the juicy bits. So we'll get most of the data from this just under 8-minute preview. So let's get to it.
You can kind of put anyone in jail if you know what to do.
So this is Gavin O'Blennis, which sounds like a made-up fake silly name. It sounds like something that Scrump would say, Blennis. He is the contracting officer for the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, for those of you not gifted with the faculty of eyes, or for those of you not gifted with the faculty of reading comprehension, the Central Intelligence Agency is the CIA. This is not James O'Keefe. Someone told me this is James O'Keefe, but it's not. Everyone told me this was James O'Keefe, but I'm now realizing there's no indication that it's him. It's Sound Investigations, which is not O'Keefe Media Group. You may be thinking, oh, well, I'm not interested in it. No. That's really good news. What that means is there's now 2 groups doing what James O'Keefe is doing and being successful at it. Ooh. Good. All right. This is Sound Investigations, seemingly a new group. March 22nd. This is a month ago, I missed this. But it's still recent enough to look at. Talking to someone from the Central Intelligence Agency. Oh, now you go the wrong full screen. That's better.
You can kind of put anyone in jail if you know what to do.
How? Does the Bureau practice entrapment a lot?
We get really close. We call it a nudge.
A nudge.
He was asked, does the Bureau practice entrapment a lot? The answer is yes. The answer is for at least 20 years, they've been flagrantly using entrapment, and courts have been letting them get away with it. That is at least, as far as I know, from a review of the Gretchen Whitmer case, where it was very clearly entrapment, but that was the first time in 20 years that they haven't been able to get away with it. Even though they've been doing it and getting away with it for like 20 years. That just says they have a YouTube, but it's still pretty small. And good for them. They got this guy. I'm sure he's about to say some bad things, similar to James O'Keefe's investigation. So I'm very glad they exist. I will change all of the I'll change all the stream stuff to reflect the fact that it's not James O'Keefe. In fact, I'll do it now. Credit where credit's due. I hope you understand, chat. Like, you see the format of this and you think, oh, it's not the James O'Keefe video. It's not. Nothing to do with him, apparently.
Sometimes you just gotta give him a quick look, just to see what happens. Sometimes you light the fuse and just wait for it to follow. Nothing like putting out a fake social media thing to like really get people mad.
Alex Jones.
Yeah, so we were after him.
You are?
We did what we wanted.
Which was what?
Have you noticed, chat? Aside from all of this deluge of unethical admissions here from this guy, have you noticed something that we sometimes notice with the James O'Keefe exposés as well? I wonder perhaps if you would care to join me in noticing the fact that both men. Now, chat, press 1 if it's more likely a coincidence and that homosexuals are no more likely to be, gaping wide open and leaking their vital fluids, information, than straight people are. And press 2 if there might be a correlation between homosexuality and, shall we say, submissiveness of privacy standards. If they're going to let another man into their jiggly bits, then maybe they'll let another man into their private information bits. Don't know. Nighthawk says 3, there is a correlation between being gay and being a Fed. You might be onto something there as well, actually, yes.
Took his money away, chopped his legs off.
Gavin O'Blennis is a contracting officer at the CIA. O'Blennis worked for the FBI in 2021 and 2022 in the San Diego office, moved on to Homeland Security where he conducted asylum interviews at the southern border, and now works for the CIA managing multi-million-dollar contracts across government agencies and private sector vendors.
I work for, how do I put this without, I'm not supposed to tell people kind of job. If I say intelligence, what do you think?
CIA?
Yep.
You work for the CIA?
I do.
That's incredible.
He just told him, though. It's not subtle at all. Do you think this guy might be fired? I mean, like, we always assume, we never go back and check, do we? But some of them will say, like, you can't, one of them said you can't lose government roles. I wonder if you can for stuff like this, but I haven't actually seen the outcome of that. Ooh, that's actually something more comfortable. There we go.
Contracting officer.
That's amazing.
So I deal a lot with like different agencies. We're contracting with like Director of National Intelligence to do stuff. We do Navy, Army, any of them really.
He is so fruity. Sport. Yeah, Oda, I think that was implied or stated just now, yeah, that he worked on the border.
FBI. I used to work for the FBI, so they threw the FBI at me. They're like, here, you used to work there. Oh, I'm permanent. I'm staff. Yeah.
Good. Well, why do they call it contracting?
Because I do the contracting for them. I do all the legal contracts. I fly out to vendors and evaluate them. I love the agency.
Good for you.
I like the Bureau, too. The Bureau was a lot of fun. I got to do a lot of cool stuff with the Bureau. I was the guy in the back of the truck in the van.
O'Blennis spoke to an undercover Sound Investigations reporter about his work experience involving near entrapment and his employer's involvement with political commentator Alex Jones's legal battles.
As long as the Bureau is able to progress far enough to be able to put pro-lifers in jail whenever they want.
Yeah.
You think that's on the agenda?
You can kind of put anyone in jail if you know what to do.
How?
You set them up. You create the situation to where they have no choice but to act on their impulse. And once they act on that impulse, some would call that entrapment. It's a fine line.
It's entrapment. The only fine line is the one that should be around your neck when the... No, never mind. I think you're probably over it, mate. The way that you're talking, there's no way it's not entrapment. We set them up. Yeah, that's what entrapment is. That's what that's called. We set them up, but, only sort of. Yeah, no, if you set them up, it's entrapment. Is there any exceptions, chat? Have I missed something here? I guess there's the idea that if the officer is not distinct from a real customer, and they do get real customers, like if it's a prostitute and prostitution is illegal, then it can be argued that it's not entrapment because it's like a standard customer. Maybe that's true, but I don't think most of what the CIA does is that routine. I think it's more exceptional stuff. We have long, not even suspected, it's been pretty obvious that agencies, in this case in the US, CIA and FBI, will set people up to delete them. Do you remember the Vegas hotel shooting, which was not a suspicious shooting at all, where the brother of the alleged shooter said, this doesn't make any sense, and gave a list of reasons why it doesn't make any sense. He was then discovered by I think the FBI, to have a laptop, Windows 95 laptop, full of child. Oh, really? Oh, okay. Well, I guess he's deleted then. No more of him. It was a very obvious setup. And there are other things in recent history one might consider to be a setup of a kind. Epstein's death, for example. The Boeing whistleblower's death. So what we are seeing here, I'm sure it's not the first time we've seen this, but for me, it's the clearest, I think. A clear transition in our understanding from, yes, they almost certainly do misuse the law to set up situations where non-criminals look like criminals to get rid of them. We've gone from that to a suspicion of that, a very strong suspicion of that, to, yeah, they do. We know they do. It's normal. So anytime you see something happening that looks like it could be that, it's no longer a matter of, well, that's a bit far-fetched, you know, to think that an intelligent... No, it's actually quite likely. If they stand to gain, it's actually quite likely. So we'll bear this in mind.
Does the Bureau practice entrapment a lot?
We get really close.
Not officially.
No. We get as close as we can. We get as close as we can to it without doing it.
So they can entrap some of these pro-lifers into doing things that they don't...
Depending, yeah. We call it a nudge.
A nudge.
A nudge. Sometimes you just gotta give them a quick little, just to see what happens, right?
And how does that happen?
You put a post out there, or you have someone fake profile say something that triggers, that we know is going to trigger them, right? Like, we already know your history. If we're to that.
So, bear in mind, these are the people with all the funding and all the privacy-busting access to get to your stuff, and pretty reliably they can be identified as feds. You know, if you're trying to entrap boomers, they're going to have an easier time of it. Probably what they're talking about here is mostly boomers and Gen Xers that aren't that familiar with the internet. But if you see someone with a profile name, something like 1488 Kitty, and they come along and they've got like a white supremacist, Nazi, pro Second Amendment, like pro Trump Biden in their profile picture, all that stuff. It's like, it's the most blatant thing and then they DM you saying, hey, do you know where I could find illegal attachments for firearms? Do you know where I could find someone who's willing to help me modify a firearm to make it illegal? Hey, do you want to blow up a government building? That's pretty obvious. And I wonder, is anyone falling for those? Bear in mind, to reiterate, those Fed accounts are from the people with basically infinite money and basically infinite resources to violate your privacy and know everything they need to know to manipulate you. And they are ranking amateurs at it. Almost any of us listening right now in this Discord server, almost any of us could do their job in that particular way better than they can. And here is one of the faces of that incompetence.
We already know everything about it. So we're like, oh, this will piss them off.
Oh,
sometimes you light the fuse and just wait for it to follow, right?
Like a rally. So when a rally happens, that's sometimes the Bureau behind it?
Yeah, sometimes. Nothing like putting out a fake social media thing to like really get people mad. Post fake news. Sometimes it's fine.
If ever you get angry about something on the internet, just notify yourself, do I know that was not posted specifically to get me angry by someone who honestly does not believe it? Because, you know, probably about half the time it was, whether it's these guys or not. I may not follow this perfectly, but I follow it pretty well. It's not worth getting angry at stuff you see on social media. Sure, get angry at the news when something unjust is happening. Sure, get angry at things that matter, but don't get angry at some stupid thing someone said on social media. Don't be afraid to just ignore people, because there's millions of people that you don't hear from. But you be sparing, obviously. And you've got to be smart with that. You shouldn't ignore people just because you disagree with them. You should ignore people if they have literally no value to you. And there are some people like that, even in our very midst. Although not in the call right now, to be fair.
Fake? It's embellished a little bit.
Who would be like a big influencer that you're after? You're like I don't even know these names, like a Fox News person or like a Tucker Carlson or like
I'm sure he's on the radar, right? You always want the biggest and loudest. Like that, what was his name? The one that said the Sandy Hook didn't happen.
Alex Jones.
Yeah, so we were after him.
You are?
I love how the CIA guy wasn't like, how did he know that so quickly? But never mind.
Are you still after him? Why?
Because he's broke. He got found guilty and had to pay like $100 million.
I think it was actually $1 billion. I don't know, like that was the initial finding. I don't know if he actually had to pay that, but Alex Jones being broke, I haven't seen any indication of it, except of course that he has been charged infinite money for his opinions. It was a ridiculous sum, but I think it was reduced. Yeah. I mean, it's still ridiculous. I don't know if maybe there's some argument you can make that, like, defamation-wise, that there is a valid civil case there, but I think you could quite easily argue the First Amendment supersedes that. If he was saying that I think his argument was that they were crisis actors or something. Now, sure, you could argue that's defamation, but I don't know if you could argue that it's damaged them, and I don't think you could argue that the defamation is more important than his right to say that. So, yeah, that sounds like bullshit to me.
So why were you after him?
We're not anymore.
Just to get the money from him?
Yeah.
Was that court case used? Was that a CIA
Sure it
thing?
was.
That was the agency thing?
Well, actually, it was a defamation case. So it's a civil, not government. But we were looking at all of his followers, commenting, following, like, who's that going to lead us to, right? So even though it's technically not our, well, not the agency, definitely, but the Bureau, for instance, yeah, that's not our purview. It's a civil matter. But since they got all this access to his stuff, and it's there, what can we go find?
And did you find anything?
I can't tell you
Oh,
if we did. But, so, it's just kind of like, realize the opportunity that you have.
So with Alex Jones, you were watching him long before anything ended up happening.
Probably. It wasn't my office, but, I mean, we would have been well aware of what he was doing.
And the goal with him was what? Just to bankrupt him?
Pretty much. And we let the families do it.
And what?
We let the families do it.
Were they encouraged to do that by the Bureau? Like nudged?
We don't encourage people,
But like,
we just say there's no federal statute being broken, but you do have the option for a civil case, and it's a pretty good case,
nice.
in our opinion.
So, if we read a bit between the lines here, it may be that, yes, there was direct nudging, but they may not have been. I don't see any reason to believe that case would have had to have been instigated by the feds. There's a lot of money in it for the civil case, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. I don't know if if there's any validity to the idea Alex Jones has that they were crisis actors. I've seen some pictures of like the same victims at different shootings. I don't know if that's accurate, but if it were, then yeah, I would suspect entirely that it was set up deliberately. That the whole thing was done not because of a civil intent, but to delete Alex Jones because he was getting too loud. But I don't suspect that the whole thing was fake, as Alex Jones apparently said.
Oh, that makes so much sense. I have a cousin who's a lawyer, so that's a lot of these cases. They're kind of encouraged by the FBI.
Yeah, like there's nothing federal law we can do, but civilly we can go at him that way. I chop his legs off.
And they did.
Yeah.
So the FBI was happy.
We didn't care. We were like, oh.
Basically, the citizens did your job.
Yeah.
Wow, so you can encourage a civil lawsuit.
Not encourage. Educate.
What can you do with people like Alex Jones now? Because he's still out there.
Yeah.
He's still chirping.
He can chirp.
They're still watching him?
Yeah.
Why?
He did what we wanted.
Which was what?
Took his money away. We shut him up for a while. You're never going to shut him up permanently.
How? Well, unless you put him in prison.
But again, he didn't do anything to go to prison. Being ignorant is not a crime, though it should.
This attitude tracks with what I've seen, and also somewhat puts to bed the notion that our opponents are masterminds with unlimited power to abuse the people. Like, they have a lot of power to abuse the people, but they still have to be careful how they misuse it. Because if they were to just kill or imprison Alex Jones on no basis, you might say they get away with it, you might say no one would do anything, and you might be right. But they can't get away with that very many times before people stop letting them, by whatever means that would be. Our opponent's power is great, but it's actually not unlimited, and there are quite a lot of ways in which it's limited. He's saying here that he doesn't care, but he's also saying that I think he's clearly implying that ideally for him, Alex Jones should be in prison. just for his opinions, quote unquote ignorance. So if we're to take him relatively at his word here, and if we assume that there's no power above this one that has significantly different constraints, and he's the CIA and the FBI, this guy, so doubt there is, then we at least realize that, yes, our opponent requires that assumed legitimacy I've been talking about. They can't just do anything. And if they do, they know they may get away with it for a little while, but not for long. Rigging the election is a great example of that. I assumed back in 2020, or before 2020, that there was a pretty low chance that they would widespread rig the election, because I knew that they needed that assumed legitimacy. And I think I was right that they need it. Of course, I was wrong that there was a low chance they'd rig it. They did rig it. But in so doing, they sacrificed a large chunk of their perceived legitimacy, at least from a large portion of the public. Now, nothing came of it, but there's numbers tracked in the abstract rift between people. Numbers tracked, which you could never directly measure, but which are ticking and are reflected by the opinions of every given person, where that number might have shifted from like a 15% loss of perceived legitimacy in 2020 to a 35% loss of perceived legitimacy, all at once because of the rigged election. And maybe over the course of 4 years, it ticked up that far, maybe even further. And what the threshold is at which they can no longer rule and maintain power and people actually believe them and follow them reliably, I don't know what the threshold for that is, but I suspect we are very close to hitting it. If they rig the election again, I think it'll be an even greater increase in that scale, because people will have they'll have heard of it happening once and they'll not believe it because it only happened once. Well, it sounds unbelievable, but if everyone's saying it's happened again, it'll be a lot harder to keep people in the dark about it. Even then, if they try and rig it and fail, but we still find evidence they've rigged it, well, that's a double whammy. Let's see if that happens. It's also possible that they fail to rig it, but I think they will pull out all the stops to try. So keep an eye on it. But even if they successfully rig it and Biden gets a second term, it's not over yet. Not even the peaceful path is over. Now, I wouldn't blame any militants for reacting at that point, really. Do not crime, of course, chat. But I would understand. However, if they don't, it still isn't over.
It is. I mean, what you could bring a nudge.
He did incite a riot, like Cheeto. He didn't.
By the way, in case you missed the facts of the case, Trump did not incite a riot. He incited a protest. So same as all the Black Lives Matter. Well, same as Black Lives Matter in your own narrative, though usually not in reality. See Maxine Waters.
People to go shoot people.
Trump didn't do that either.
He didn't do anything.
Additionally, O'Blennis states that he knows and works with FBI agents who were undercover in the January 6th Capitol riot, estimating about
Bitch, who picks... Is that normal? You pick up an entire lettuce leaf, tear it in half, and then start munching on it? Is this like real herbivore hours? Is this herbivore core? Is he a herb cell? Is this how they operate?
20 field agents were there undercover. While O'Blennis notes that they were not involved in violence, this appears to be the first admission of undercover FBI agents in attendance.
I thought you said that there were FBI agents in the crowd at J6.
There always are when there's a big protest in D.C. Just in case it gets out of hand like that. But there wasn't enough to turn that tide. I mean, I'm talking they maybe have 20. You needed 1,000 to get rid of that crowd.
So they had like, that was just 20?
Yeah, just to go through and observe and see what they could hear, that kind of thing.
Wow. So we knew that there were feds in that crowd. However, there's also been some pretty good evidence that the feds were in fact instigating. Now, there's all this furore over the years about Ray Epps, about him being a Fed, and for a while I was skeptical of that notion. And then he got sentenced with a slap on the wrist, bearing in mind that people that weren't even there have received decades in prison. Meanwhile, Ray Epps, who was there and filmed inciting violence, one of the only people doing it, he got a slap on the wrist. It was at that moment I realized, never mind. Yes, he was a Fed. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, definitely. They needed 1,000 at least.
So it's very possible to sort of to bring some doubt on some of our previous statements, to be fair, that this guy doesn't know everything. That there's lots of operations that happen and lots of details at high levels that he is not aware of. He's acting like he is, but he's not. Because I am 95% sure that there was at least one, if not multiple, probably at least 10, violent instigators given that objective on Jan 6th.
Wow. See, that's also Capitol Police jurisdiction. They're in charge.
Well, yes. They were, and they helped instigate the violence. Again, if you look at the footage, in case anyone missed it, the protest was peaceful. I don't know if they were technically trespassing, but it's called the People's House, and there's an argument you could make that they're allowed to protest there. And the Capitol Police were, they didn't even appear to be trying to get rid of the crowd. They just appeared to be trying to antagonize them, shooting rubber bullets and explosives into the crowd, and beating them as well. It did not look like they were trying to push them back. It looked like they were trying to get the crowd violent. It's my uninformed opinion. John Wick says FBI and CIA have to be decided simultaneously, otherwise one will just resurrect the other. You don't have to get it perfect first time, but I agree that would be a better idea. But if you remove one of them, our opponents aren't magic. They can't just remove the problem of bureaucratic transfer. Granted, it's not impossible to make some progress there, but they will be slowed down significantly if one is just deleted. But more likely what will happen is that now that it's been several years, Trump may have people in mind that he can actually trust to run these institutions. I don't know if they can perfectly clean them out, but with the mandate of a very upset president who knows their problems, I mean, similar to JFK, they might just have to assassinate Trump to prevent this from happening. And if they do, that they're not going to get away with it this time, I don't think. I think that's going to kick up quite a stink, or they would have done it already, especially if he's already president when it happens. Don't forget all the 4chan autists today who can spread that information, and Twitter, which will let it spread. And they have power, our opponents, but they're deathly afraid to overuse it. We are arguably in the home stretch at this point for the US, and not as confident for other nations, but the US is getting pretty close. The NSA should go before the CIA does. The NSA is technically the domestic spying operation. It should be questioned what each of them do. The FBI being an agency to investigate the interior means that you should not have other agencies to investigate the interior. You could argue that you should have divisions of the FBI which specialize, but you don't need additional agencies. And if you have an agency to investigate the exterior, you don't need more than one. Even having one of each is some sprawl, some institutional sprawl. And these institutions are not part of the founding conception of the nation, which means they're unbalanced in terms of accountability. Now, the way that America's set up is quite different from how it was originally envisaged. Even the way it was when it kind of settled a few years after 1776, it's quite very different now from how it was then. But a lot of those changes ended up being fairly stable. The CIA, FBI, and all these institutions who are given power by the government, and have a mandate but no oversight, that's not balanced. As it turns out, the accountability pattern, there's not enough accountability on them for the power they have, and so they become abused. And so they become the problem that we're all aware of, as we indeed are. So that's always the way it happens. It's always the way you spot a problem. Is the most abusable things are where the abusers go, and then you notice that they're there, and so you see that it's a problem. It's a matter of inefficiency and disbalance, in principle initially, but then in practice as evidence that it's where you need to pay your attention. Most of these orgs you mentioned report only to their direct military branch or are extremely specialized in their duties. Tell just from the names. Okay, so they're arguing over technically what is an intelligence agency. But, yeah, I don't know. Depending on your definition of agency, and there's not necessarily any correct one, unless one of you wants to cite one that's correct. Almost at the end of the video now.
So
Why they didn't have more on hand, I don't know.
The Bureau didn't really want people knowing that they were in the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Because that would be overstepping their bounds.
A little bit.
Do people know that?
Why?
Did people know that the Bureau was in the crowd?
Nope, and probably never will.
They already do. Like, this is... I think he's being honest here. He thinks no one figured it out. But people have. Loads of people on our side have figured out that there were feds in the crowd. In fact, we probably know more about them than he does. Because at least one of them was clearly instigating and he thinks they weren't. Maybe he is being honest there. Maybe he honestly thinks that the feds in the crowd were just there to observe. Because this is not his department, I guess, or not his op. But they were. At least one of them seems to have been. He probably knows less than other people, than our side does. It's remarkable. Like, this just goes back to the idea of, unless this guy's a real exception of his agency, our opponents are not masterminds. They are mostly idiots installed into position, usually trained through waning institutions into a sort of rote activity, and rarely are they anything but callous and uncaring, usually psychopathic. Psychopaths are devious in the short term, do shit like COVID, do shit like rigging the election, do shit like mass importation of illegal immigrants. They're devious in the short and arguably midterm. They're devious in the 1 to 2 to 3 to maybe 5 year planning term. But beyond that, it starts to fall apart because there's no way that you can build something without principles, without understanding, without the methods evolution has deigned for humans to organize together in a positive way, which involves empathy. And that's what non-psychopaths are good at. Non-psychopaths and non-normies are good at building or good at leading the building of things. So the long-term strategy, the honest strategy, the principled strategy are the same one, and none of them are the ones our opponent are taking, which is why whenever I hear someone say we should take on a violent short-termist strategy, no, that is the specialization of the psychopath who is our direct enemy. Our specialization is the long-term, truthful, and constructive structure. We may lose a lot of battles on the way. We may have to be patient. We may see a lot of injustices that we can't solve on the day, but that patience is, not only is it part of maturity, but it's part of all change. It's one of the most important aspects of a political thinker. Because eventually we do win, because we do have the momentum, because the truth is actually powerful, and because the normies ultimately would prefer to believe something true than something false if they have the choice. They don't know what's true and false, but they'll learn through experiencing it. We will see in 2024. Britway says, but whom watches The Watchmen? I watched The Watchmen. It's a great movie. My favorite movie, actually. But what do you mean by that? What was that a reference to? Pretty sure JFK was about taking the hook-nosed nukes away. Maybe that was it. Maybe that was it. Maybe it's even possible, because we don't really know. It's even possible that we overestimate how evil and duplicitous the CIA and FBI are. And maybe it's to the extent that this guy is actually aware of. You know, plus a bit, obviously, because I think there were instigators in Jan 6th, but plus a bit, but plus not much. Perhaps they've actually never assassinated, they've never considered assassinating a local leader, far less a president. Maybe they would be willing to now, but maybe they wouldn't. Maybe it wasn't them that did JFK. Maybe they were involved but didn't want it to happen or didn't direct it. I'm not sure. And whilst many of us are pretty sure, strong suspicions, we don't actually know for sure. So a lot of things are up in the air.